This is the second part of the lecture on color and brain interaction. Colors are a side product of the light spectrum. Light is reflected or absorbed where it hits, and the remaining or reflected waves are received by the human eye to be interpreted in the human brain. Objects, in other words, don't have colors. Colors are phenomena arising in the brain during the process of interpreting the light. An object transmits or throws back from another light source. An apple is not red when the light of all colors of the sun hits the apple. The red light reflects because the apple consists of molecules absorbing all light waves except the red ones, which are thrown back to be caught by the eye. A green apple reflects accordingly only the green light. Many ancient cultures, including Egypt and China, have been practicing color therapy through centuries and have used color to relieve and heal different mental and physical diseases. Today we know that this is the electromagnetic energy of the color, the frequency each single color vibrates with, which affects the mind. The brain's oscillations synchronize with other words, with the color's oscillation and create a new balance in the body's energy field. There are different schools of thoughts, but to understand all of these, we need to first understand how brain and color perception works. Let's explore this in this part. A world without color appears to be missing crucial elements, and indeed it is. Colors not only enable us to see the world more precisely, they also create emergent qualities that would not exist without them. The color photograph we are looking at reveals autumn leaves in the calm water of a lake, along with the reflection of trees and of a blue moon afternoon sky behind them. Now, if this scene turns into a black and white picture, slowly in front of your eyes, observe how the details go away. The leaves are less distinct. The blue sky is absent. The reflections of the light are weak. The water itself is hardly visible. Yellow trees in the background become meaningless, and the difference in apparent depth among the sky, trees, and the floating leaf is all but gone. Despite lot of research, yet the role of color and even the true nature of color is not well recognized. One belief is that color is a defining and essential property of objects, one depending entirely on the specific wavelengths of light reflected from them. But this belief is considered as mistaken also. Another belief is that color is a sensation created in the brain. If the colors we perceived depended only on the wavelength of reflected light, an object's color would appear to change dramatically with variation in illumination throughout the day and in shadows. Instead, patterns of activity in the brain render an object's color relatively stable despite changing in its environment. Most researchers who study vision agree that color helps us discriminate objects when differences in brightness are insufficient for this task. Some go so far as to say that color is a luxury not really needed. After all, totally colorblind people and many species of animals seems to do well without the degree of color perception that most humans have. The pathways in the brain that serves navigation and movement, for example, is essentially colorblind. Their argument is that people who become colorblind after a stroke appear to have normal visual perception otherwise. Such observations have been taken as a support for the insular nature of color processing, suggesting it has no role in processing depth and form. In short, that color is it's their view that color is only about hue, saturation, and brightness. In the image you are seeing right now, which was created by Ritsumeikan University in Japan, you must be seeing the word illusory green written in green color. The world appeared to be greenish, though this image consists of only blue, cyan, and black. So, our brain is being tricked to see the green color. And also, if you observe or stare for a long time, you cannot watch it for a long time. The demonstration on the next slide will also make your concept about elusive colors more clear. You can see this box changing color when it's changing the sides. But actually, the color of the box is constant. It's not changing. But when the background behind this box changes, the brain is being tricked to view the color of box differently. Study of elusive or misleading colors, colors that the brain is tricked into seeing, demonstrate that color processing in the brain occurs hand in hand with processing of other properties, such as shape and boundary. In a decade-long attempt to distinguish how color influences perception of other properties in object, some researchers have considered a number of novel illusions that have helped them understand how the neural processing of color result in emergent properties of shape and boundaries. The picture you are viewing right now is actually black and white, but the color lines drawn on it tricks our brain to consider this picture as a colored picture. So, before we begin our discussion of these illusions in details, however, we need to recall how the human visual system processes color.
There are many ways that we use color. Artists use different colors to express emotions. Marketers attach colors to their brands to make them more recognizable. Animals use colors to ward off predators or attract mates, and people do too. What is color? Scientists define color as the limited range of light that we humans can see. We classify different types of light based on their wavelength, which can be anywhere from many meters in between each wave peak to lengths as short as the diameter of an atom. The full electromagnetic spectrum ranges from high-energy light waves with short wavelengths, like cosmic and gamma rays, to low-energy light waves with long wavelengths, like radio waves. The light we are able to see, called the visible light spectrum, ranges from violet light, which has a wavelength of about 400 nanometers, to red light, which has a longer wavelength of about 650 to 700 nanometers. But how do we perceive the visible light spectrum? When light bounces off an object, like this painting, into our eyes, it first hits the cornea, a film that lays on top of our eyes. This layer bends light towards the pupil, which dilates or contracts to let in more or less light. Once light passes through the pupil, it is sent to the lens, which angles and focuses the light to a point on the outer layer of the retina. Here, light-sensitive cells, called rods and cones, send information to ganglion nerve cells in the inner retina. Ganglion cells then send the information to the optic nerve, which sends the signal to the brain, where the signal is processed and interpreted. Rods and cones, the two types of light-sensitive cells located on the outer retina, have different jobs. Rods are responsible for our perception of light and dark and our peripheral vision. Cones are what allow us to see color. They are found in the center of the retina where light is focused. Cones come in 3 varieties, each sensitive to a different range of light. Interestingly, we have more cones sensitive to red light, meaning our vision is best for warmer colors like reds, oranges, and yellows. However, our cones aren't sensitive to light with wavelengths shorter than 400 nanometers or longer than around 700 nanometers. For example, a gamma wave's wavelength is about the size of an atomic nucleus, which is much too short for any of our three types of cones to sense. Radio waves are too long, with wavelengths longer than two Empire State Buildings put together. That doesn't mean that these forms of light aren't visible, per se. Other animals have different kinds and numbers of cones, which allows them to see the world differently than we do. Dogs, for example, are more limited in the wavelengths they can see because they only have two types of cones, leaving them colorblind to differences between red and green. Butterflies have four types of cones in their eyes, letting them see ultraviolet light. The animal with the best color vision might be the mantis shrimp, which has 12 different kinds of cones. If Pablo Picasso and Paul Klee created amazing works of art with just 3 types of cones, imagine the masterpieces the mantis shrimp would create with 12.
About 40% or more of the human brain is thought to be involved in vision. In the areas stimulated early in visual processing, that's the part of the visual cortex, neurons are organized into the maps that provide a point-to-point representation of the visual field we look onto. From there, the visual signal disperses to more than 30 different areas in the brain, interconnected by more than 300 circuits. Each of the areas has specialized functions such as processing color, motion, depth, and form, although no area mediates one perceptual quality exclusively. Somehow, all this information is combined, in the end, into a unitary perception of an object having particular shape and color. Neuroscientists do not yet understand the details of how this comes about. Interestingly, bilateral damage to certain visual areas lead to deficit in the perception of form as well as color, which offers another piece of evidence that color is not disembodied from the other properties of an object. The intermingling of color signal in the brain with signals carrying information about the form of the object can result in perception not expected from an analysis of the wavelength of light reflected from those objects. Some experiments with illusory colors illustrate how important color can be in defining the extent and shape of a figure. Under certain conditions, color changes in response to the surrounding color. It can become more different, maybe called as contrast, or more similar, maybe called as assimilation. The spreading of similar color has been described only over rather narrow areas, in agreement with the finding that most connections among visual neurons in the brain are relatively short range. There was a surprising find that when an uncolored area is enclosed by two differently colored boundary contours, with the inner contour lighter than the outer contour, tint originates from the inner contour, spreading across the entire area, even over rather long distances. Because the color resembles a faint veil, such as that seen in watercolor painting, as you are seeing in this picture right in front of you, that all the area which is inside those colored boundaries, it looks a slightest brown or brownish tint. This illusion is called as the watercolor effect. The spreading requires the two contours to be touching so that the darker color can act as a barrier to your vision, confining the spreading of the lighter color to the inside while preventing it from spreading to the outside. But when you zoom into the picture, you will find that there is no tint on the surface as viewed before. A possible neural explanation for the watercolor illusion is that the combination of a lighter contour flanked by a darker contour or on even lighter background stimulates neurons that respond only to a contour that is lighter on the inside than the outside, or to a contour that is darker on the inside than the outside, but not to both. Border ownership most likely is encoded at early stages of processing in the visual cortex. The research showed that wiggly lines produce stronger watercolor spreading than straight ones do, probably because the rolling border engage more neurons responsive to orientation. The colors signaled by these uneven edges must be propagated across region of a cortex that serve large area of a visual field, continuing the spread of color until border sensitive cells on the other side of enclosed area provide a barrier to flow. Color and form are thus bound together inseparably in the brain and perception at this level. Another interesting brain deception effect can be visualized in this figure known as Ehrenstein figure. You can see the white discs in this figure. The Ehrenstein figure was first introduced in 1841 by a German psychologist, Walter Ehrenstein, of the early 20th century Berlin School of Gestalt Psychology. For most people, the Ehrenstein figure will produce the visual experience of apparent contours defining white discs. Of course, these discs do not actually exist as a part of the figure. We are really perceiving only fragments of lines. Most individuals will experience an illusory filling in of colors such that the apparent discs are filled with a solid white that is brighter than the rest of the figure. A third effect is one of the illusory depth. The illusory discs are perceived as a figure which block the undefined ground which continues behind them in different plane. The further variant to the deception effect is this image known as neon color spreading. Neon color spreading appears to have made its scientific debut in Italian psychologist Dario Varian's book in 1971 on chromatic contrast and diffusion phenomena. The physiological mechanism underlying this neon color spreading are not entirely understood yet. And finally, this beautiful neon color spreading produced by Visual Perception Lab give us a clear idea that how our brain is being deceived by these color illusions. But on the other hand, it gives us, the designers, a vast array of options to create interesting designs.